Welcome to new episode of Inside the Economist's Mind.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling a really crucial topic, unemployment.
Indeed.
Hmm.
It's one of those figures we see constantly.
Exactly. And we're going to sort of dig into how economists measure it and also the different kinds that exist.
Yeah, break it down a bit.
Think of this as your backstage pass, to understanding those numbers you see in the news.
And why they matter for the bigger economic picture.
Right. We'll be drawing from a resource that lays out the measurement methods and the different types.
And our goal, really, is that by the end of this deep dive, you'll hear unemployment and really grasp its significance.
Not just the number, but the nuances behind it.
The different layers, exactly.
All right, so let's get right to it. When economists talk about the unemployment rate, how do they actually figure that out? Where do they start?
Okay, so it all begins with the labor market.
Right.
Which is, basically the supply and demand for labor. People wanting work, businesses needing workers. And the unemployment rate is, well, it's a key indicator for how that market's doing.
And that tells us about the wider economy, too.
Absolutely. It feeds into thinking about overall economic performance, even influences things like monetary policy decisions.
Got it. So unemployment itself.
Yeah.
It's just people without jobs, yeah.
Almost. The definition economists use is a bit tighter. It's someone who is willing and able to work, is actively looking for a paid job, but doesn't currently have one.
Actively looking, that's key.
Very key. And the rate is the percentage of the labor force that fits that description.
Okay, and remind us, the labor force is?
The labor force is simply everyone who's either employed or unemployed. So the sum of those two groups.
The active participants, basically.
That's a good way to put it. Everyone active in the job market.
Right. So how do we actually count these people? Who's employed, who's unemployed?
Well, here in Australia, that's the job of the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS.
Oh.
They run the labor force survey every month. It's quite large. They interview around 50,000 people.
50,000.
Wow. Yeah. And based on those interviews, they classify the working age population, that's everyone 15 and over, into three broad categories.
And those three are?
Okay. First, you've got the employed. That's anyone who worked for 1 hour or more in a paid job during the survey's reference week.
Just 1 hour?
Just 1 hour counts as employed, yes. Second, the unemployed. These are people without a paid job, A&D, who were actively looking for work recently.
Right, actively looking again.
And available to start. And third, there's the group not in the labor force.
Okay, who's in that bucket?
That includes people who aren't employed but also aren't looking for work. Think full-time students, unpaid carers, retirees, people permanently unable to work.
Got it. So just not having a job isn't enough. You have to be looking to be counted as unemployed. That's a really important distinction.
It absolutely is. So once the ABS has sorted people into these groups, they can calculate the key indicators.
Like the labor force itself.
Exactly. Labor force employed plus unemployed.
Yeah.
Simple addition.
And then the unemployment rate.
The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed people divided by the total labor force, then multiply by 100 to get a percentage.
Formula is unemployed labor force 100.
That's the one.
Can you give us a quick example with some numbers? Make it concrete.
Sure. Let's say 12.6 million people are employed and 0.7 million are unemployed.
Okay.
First, the labor force is 12.6 plus 0.7, so 13.3 million people.
Right.
Then the unemployment rate is 0.7 million, 13.3 million, 100. That works out to about 5.3%.
5.3%. So that percentage represents those 700,000 people actively seeking work within that labor force.
Precisely. It's a snapshot.
And you mentioned another important rate, the participation rate.
Ah, yes, the participation rate. That tells us what slice of the entire working age population is actually in the labor force, either working or looking.
So it's a broader measure than the unemployment rate.
It is. It gives a sense of the potential workforce size and how much labor supply is being tapped. Policymakers watch this one closely.
How's that one calculated?
It's the labor force divided by the working age population times 100.
Okay.
So using our earlier numbers, if the working age population was, say, 20.0 million,
Right.
the participation rate would be 13.3 million, 20.0 million, 100, which is 66.5%.
Okay, so 66.5% of everyone aged 15 and over is either working or looking for work, in that example.
Exactly. So you have the unemployment rate focusing on joblessness within the active workforce.
And the participation rate showing how many people are active overall.
You've got it. Now, it's really important to understand that the unemployment rate isn't static. It moves around.
Yeah, it goes up and down with the economy, right?
That's a big part of it, cyclical factors. When the economy slows down, unemployment tends to rise.
Fewer jobs available.
Exactly. But there are also structural things happening in the economy that affect it. And crucially, the size of the labor force itself can change.
How does the labor force size changing affect the unemployment rate?
Well, think about it. People decide whether or not to even look for work. If the economy's booming and jobs are plentiful, more people might be encouraged to start looking, which actually increases the labor force.
And that could potentially even push the unemployment rate up slightly, even if jobs are being created, or keep it steady.
It could, temporarily, or slow its fall. Conversely, in a bad recession, some people get discouraged after looking for ages.
And they just stop looking.
They might give up actively searching. If they stop looking, they drop out of the unemployed category and out of the labor force altogether.
So the unemployment rate could actually fall, but not for a good reason.
Precisely. It could fall because people are leaving the labor force, not because they found jobs. That's why looking at the participation rate alongside the unemployment rate is so vital.
That's a really key point. A falling rate isn't always good news if participation is also falling.
Exactly. And there are longer-term trends, too, like more part-time work options, more women participating over decades, people retiring later. All that shapes the participation rate over time.
Okay, that's a great foundation on measurement. Now let's get into the different types of unemployment. I know economists break it down.
Yes, we usually talk about three main types:
Yeah.
cyclical, structural, and frictional.
Okay.
Now, it's worth saying up front, these categories aren't always perfectly neat boxes in the real world. They can overlap.
Right, reality is messy.
And we can't measure them directly, like the overall rate. But they give us a really useful framework for thinking about why people are unemployed.
Makes sense. Let's start with cyclical. What's the story there?
Cyclical unemployment is the one directly linked to the ups and downs of the economy, the business cycle.
Okay.
When the economy enters a downturn, demand for goods and services falls, businesses might cut back production.
Which means layoffs, hiring freezes.
Exactly. Fewer job openings, harder to find work. So cyclical unemployment rises.
And when the economy booms?
The opposite happens. Demand picks up, businesses need more people, hiring increases, and cyclical unemployment falls.
So it follows the cycle of the economy.
Pretty much. It's generally seen as a medium-term thing, maybe lasting 1 to 12 months, roughly following the economic cycle.
Can you give examples?
Sure. We saw a sharp rise in the early 1990s recession here in Australia. Then it fell during the growth years in the mid-2000s. Then it rose again around the global financial crisis.
And what does high cyclical unemployment tell us?
It signals that the economy probably isn't running at full potential. There's slack.
People willing to work but can't find jobs because of the downturn?
Right. And that extra competition for jobs can mean less pressure for wages to go up.
Ah, which could affect inflation.
It can, potentially leading to lower inflation. It highlights that trade-off policymakers sometimes face,
And how do they typically fight cyclical unemployment?
often through things like expansionary monetary policy, like the central bank, lowering interest rates to try and boost overall demand and get businesses hiring again.
Okay, stimulating the economy. Got it. Let's move to structural unemployment. That sounds
Yeah,
more
that's right.
fundamental.
It is. Structural unemployment comes from a mismatch between the jobs available and the job seekers.
A mismatch in what sense? Skills? Location?
Both,
Yeah.
potentially. It could be that the skills people have don't match what employers need, or the jobs might be in one part of the country while the job seekers are somewhere else.
So it's not just about the overall number of jobs, but whether they fit the available workers.
Exactly. It's about the structure of the economy itself. And this can happen even when the overall economy is doing okay.
What causes these mismatches?
Technology is a big one. Automation replacing certain types of jobs.
Like routine manual work.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Or whole industries declining, like maybe manufacturing shrinking in some areas. People who worked in those sectors might find their skills aren't in demand anymore.
And they need to retrain or move.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That's why structural unemployment can often be longer lasting.
Longer than cyclical.
Often, yes. It can increase the risk of people becoming long-term unemployed, meaning out of work for over a year.
Because finding a new role requires more fundamental change for the worker.
Right. You might need significant retraining or maybe even relocation, which isn't easy.
And this exists even in good economic times, you said.
It can, yes. Unlike cyclical unemployment, it's not just about a lack of overall demand. Theoretically, it doesn't directly push wages or inflation up or down in the same way.
So what's the policy response for structural unemployment? Not just stimulating demand, presumably.
No, the focus there is more on The supply side of the labor market, things like investing in education, skills training programs, maybe initiatives to help people relocate if needed.
Addressing the root cause, the mismatch.
Exactly.
Okay, that leaves frictional unemployment. That one sounds almost positive.
Huh. Well, in a way, yes. Frictional unemployment is the temporary unemployment that happens when people are moving between jobs.
Just the normal churn.
Exactly. People leaving a job to find a better one. Recent graduates looking for their first position. People re-entering the workforce after a break.
So it's the time spent searching.
Yes. It takes time for individuals to search for the right job, and it takes time for businesses to find the right candidates. That search period creates temporary unemployment.
And this is generally short.
Usually, yes, often less than a month. It's considered a normal, even healthy feature of a dynamic labor market.
Healthy because it means people are moving to better fitting jobs.
Right. It helps allocate labor efficiently. It happens at all points in the business cycle, even when the economy is strong.
And its impact on wages or inflation.
Probably not significant, much like structural unemployment in theory.
Okay, so quick recap. Cyclical follows the economy's ups and downs.
Structural is about mismatches in skills or location.
And frictional is that short-term gap between jobs.
You've nailed the main three. And remember, they can be linked.
How so?
Well, imagine a really long recession with high cyclical unemployment.
Rick,
Someone might be out of work for so long due to the downturn.
that their skills get rusty.
Exactly. Or employers start to view them less favorably just because they've been unemployed for a long time. So the initial cyclical unemployment can actually turn into or worsen structural unemployment for that person.
Ah, that's a really sobering point. Long-term unemployment is tough.
It really is. It shows how these things aren't always neat categories.
Okay. Now, the resource we looked at also mentioned some other types or maybe related concepts.
Yes, complementary indicators that give us a richer view. Underemployment is a big one.
Underemployment. We hear that term a lot. What does it capture?
Underemployment is when people are employed, but they want and are available to work more hours than they currently are.
So they have a job, but not enough work.
Precisely. The ABS splits this into two groups: part-time workers who want more hours, and people who normally work full-time but are currently working part-time hours, maybe because their workplace is quiet.
So even someone counted as employed might be struggling.
Absolutely, it captures that lack of sufficient hours. And we tend to see higher rates of underemployment in certain groups,
Like who?
often women, younger workers, and older workers, partly because they make up a larger share of the part-time workforce to begin with.
Interesting. What about hidden unemployment? That sounds sneaky.
Huh. It refers to people who aren't in the official unemployment stats, but probably would work if the right job came along.
Like those discouraged workers you mentioned earlier.
Exactly like them. People who've stopped actively looking because they haven't had any luck for a long time. They're not actively looking, so they're not counted as unemployed.
But they still represent potential labor supply.
Correct. The official rate might understate the true level of people wanting work if there's significant hidden unemployment.
That's another important layer of complexity.
It is. And finally, there's seasonal unemployment.
Ah, like ski instructors in summer.
Perfect example. Or fruit pickers outside harvest season. Or maybe extra retail staff just for the Christmas rush.
Jobs that just exist at certain times of the year.
Right. It's predictable fluctuation. Because it's predictable, the ABS actually publishes seasonally adjusted data.
To smooth out those bumps.
Exactly. To try and show the underlying trend in the labor market without the regular seasonal ups and downs confusing the picture.
Okay. So while cyclical, structural, and frictional help explain why people are unemployed,
Underemployment, hidden unemployment, and seasonal patterns give us more detail about the quality of employment and the full extent of labor underutilization.
it really paints a much more detailed picture than just looking at that one headline number.
It absolutely does. You need to look at the whole dashboard, really.
This has been incredibly helpful. So, just to wrap up the key takeaways, we've looked at how the unemployment rate is measured, that careful definition involving active job searching, and how it relates to the labor force and participation rate.
Mm-hmm. And we've unpacked those three main types: cyclical, tied to the economy; structural, from those mismatches; and frictional, being the normal job switching process.
And then the importance of considering underemployment, hidden unemployment, and seasonal effects for a truly complete understanding.
Exactly. Yeah. Having these concepts in mind helps you interpret the economic news and policy debates much more effectively.
Definitely. Okay, so as we finish up, here's something to think about. With technology like AI and automation advancing so rapidly, how do you think that's going to reshape these different types of unemployment going forward?
Ooh, that's the big question, isn't it?
What might that mean for individuals, for businesses, for the economy as a whole? Something to keep an eye on for sure.
A critical area to watch.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.